Welcome to Game Fondue Reviews. In this video, we're going to take a look at Caylus. And Caylus players are taking on the role of master builders, competing to get the most prestige by building up the kingdom for King Philip the Fair of France. Let's jump right in with the description of the rules, see a few example turns being played, then we'll be back for some closing remarks. This is Caylus, set up for a 3-player game. To set up, each player is going to pick a color and take all pieces in that color. You're going to get 6 workers, along with a whole bunch of houses, and then some markers that you're going to place on the board. One of your markers is going to go on the bridge. One is going to go in your place in turn order for the first round of the game. So we can see the black player is going to go first. One is going to go in the 0 space of the scoring track, and one is going to go at the first space of each row of the favor table. Aside from that, you're going to give each player 2 food, which are represented by pink cubes, and 1 wood, which is represented by a brown cube, and a certain number of deniers based on where they are in turn order. In a 2-player game, all players are going to get 5 deniers, but in a 3 or more player game, the first player is going to get 5, the next 2 players are going to get 6, and if there's a 4th and 5th player, they're going to get 7 apiece. Next, you're going to shuffle up these pink neutral tiles and deal them out randomly to the indicated spaces, and then the bailiff and the provost are going to go on the one farthest along the road. And lastly, you're going to form a supply of all remaining building tiles in brown, gray, blue, and green, and all resources so the players can access them. From there, you're ready to start the game. The game turn is composed of 7 phases, and all players will complete 1 phase before moving on to the next one. The 7 phases are collecting income, placing workers, activating special buildings, provost's move, activating buildings, building the castle, and the end phase. The game is divided into 3 sections, which are represented by the 3 sections underneath the castle, and at the end of each section of the game, there is a scoring phase. After the 3rd scoring phase, whoever has the most prestige wins. So during the first phase of the turn, all players are going to get 2 money, plus 1 money for each green building they own, plus another 1 if they own this building here, and another 2 if they own this one here. But typically, you're just going to get 2 money at this time. After all players get their money, they're going to take turns in turn order based on this track here, placing workers on the board or passing. Workers can be placed in any unoccupied square space along the road, and you'll note that there are some pre-built spaces here, as well as up here. They can also be placed in the castle. Now, the stables in the castle are important because more than 1 guy can be placed there. So if you're the first to place in the stables, you're going to place on the 1, then the 2, and the 3. And the castle works in the same manner. Also, when you place a worker, you're going to have to pay at least 1 money. You're typically going to pay money equal to the lowest unoccupied space under the bridge. So at the beginning of the game, that's 1. So I place this guy out here. That costs me 1 money to do so. I can't place him if I don't have enough money to do it at that time. But instead of placing a worker, a player could alternatively pass. And the way they pass is they're going to take their marker here. They're going to put it on the first unoccupied space down here. And if you're the first person to pass, you immediately get 1 money, but you can place no more guys this turn. Also, now that you've passed, it's more expensive for other players to place things out on the board. So if the blue guy now wanted to place, it would cost him 2 money because that's the lowest unoccupied space under the bridge. I do want to point out there's a special rule in the 2-player game, and that's if the other player has passed, it now costs you 3 to place a guy out on the board instead of 2 like it normally does. Even after some players have passed, there are 2 situations where you will still only have to pay 1 money. The first is if you own a building. So let's say here that the black player owns this building. Even though the orange player has passed, it normally costs him 2 money. He can place on his own building for just 1 money. The second way to keep the cost at 1 is if your guy is in the rightmost circle of the inn. So for instance, if the blue guy was here, no matter how many players had passed, everything always cost him 1. But when you're placing in the inn for the first time, you're always going to place on the left side. You're going to push that guy out later in the round. The only other thing to note about placing guys is if you place in somebody else's building, so if this black guy wasn't here, blue could place there, because if black was there, it's already full. But if you place in somebody else's building, that player is immediately going to get 1 point on the prestige track. Also, because blue doesn't own the building himself, he still has to pay 2 money because the orange player has passed. So after all players have passed, we're going to move on to activating the buildings, and we're always going to go in order of the road, beginning with the gate here, all the way down to the last built building, or pre-built building in this case. If a player is placed in the gate here, they're immediately going to move their guy to any available space on the board. They will still have to award a point to somebody if they take their building. So if this guy wasn't here and he decided to go here, he doesn't have to pay any money, but black player will still get 1 point because that's his building. In the next space, whoever's placed here is going to get 3 money. And this space, you can move the provost in either direction up to 3 spaces totally for free. So for instance, you might do this. And now that didn't cost you any money. More on that later. This next space, you can pay 1 cloth and 1 money. And it shows it there to get 1 favor on the favor table. At any time in the game you gain a favor, you're going to pick one of the 4 rows and advance your marker on it if you can. During the first part of the game, the first section here, you can only advance up to the 2nd level. During the second part, up to the 4th. And at the end of the game, you can go all the way to the 5th column here. But you can still choose a row even if you cannot advance it. For instance, you could choose this row if you were here during the first part of the game, and you could still benefit from this space. It's always legal to benefit from a space you're on or earlier. So even in the example here, if I advance on the favor table in this track, I have to get a pink one the first time because that's the only space I have to the left of me. But if I choose again later to advance in this same row, I can advance here but still choose to take a pink one even though this space is a brown or a gray. But typically you're not going to do that. So whenever you gain a favor, you just pick one of these and you advance along the row and you take one of the benefits in that row. The next space dictates turn order, so if somebody was placed here, for instance, the orange guy is placed here, he would now become first in turn order. There is space for 3 people to place here, and they would adjust the turn order track accordingly. Anybody who's not placed here is just going to slide down in their existing position. So for instance, if the blue guy was in the second space, he would go here, and then black would just remain where he was, even if there was more players than just the 3. And the final special building to resolve is the inn. And the inn is special because it's the only building on the board you can actually stay in. Any other building, when it resolves, you're going to take your man back like so. But when you're placed in the inn, if there's somebody placed in this space here, they're going to knock out whoever's over here, and that player's going to take them back. But for the next turn, even after people pass, they're only going to pay 1. Now, if nobody's placed here and you're here, you have the option to remain there for the time being. You can choose to take it back, though, as well. After the inn resolves, now in passing order, players have the opportunity to choose to move the provost or not up to 3 spaces for 1 to nearest space. So for instance, orange is going to go first because he passed first. Maybe orange decides he wants to pay $2 to move the provost 2 spaces this way. The provost can never go to the bridge. This is the farthest back he can go right here, but you can pay to move him in either direction. The reason you would do that is any space after the provost is not going to occur this turn. So after all these guys have one chance to move the provost 0 to 3 spaces by paying 1 to nearest space, any spaces that he's on are going to react, and any spaces before that will also activate, but any space after him will not. So for instance, if the provost was here, all these spaces are going to activate, but this guy's going to have to take his guy back without getting any benefit from that space. We're not going to talk about the effects of all these buildings, but we are going to go over some basics. And that's the production buildings are mandatory. If you're on a production building, you have to take a resource that it enables you to take. Here you have to choose between one. You either get brown or pink. That's what happens when there's a slash. Also, some of them will have parentheses underneath. And if you're on that building and you do not own it, so for instance, if the blue player owns this and the orange guy's on it, when this activates, only if it activates, so if the provost is here, it would not. But if the provost is here, it would. The player who owns it would get to choose between whatever's in the parentheses. But if you yourself are on it, so blue player's on his own building, he does not get to choose what's in the parentheses. He just gets the normal production. Also, there's a few tiles that allow you to build new buildings along the road. You can see here there's a pre-built one that allows you to build brown buildings, and this neutral one also allows you to build brown buildings. But over here, there's one that allows you to build gray buildings, and then green, and then there's one final one here for residential. We're going to talk about how each of those work before moving on to the next phase. The gray and brown buildings work exactly the same way. That is, when a player is on that and it resolves, you can choose a building of that color by paying its cost. The cost is in the upper left-hand corner, and then you would immediately put it on the end space of the road. The farthest space along the road, note that you would not build on this space because it's pre-built, but you would get immediately the points indicated on it. So whoever built this would get 3 points, and they would mark it with their house. So for the rest of the game, everybody knows that that is their building. Green buildings, however, work a little bit differently, and this is the building space that can allow you to build green buildings. Green buildings actually have to be built over something. They can be built over any neutral building or any building you own yourself. So if it was the black player, he could build over any of these neutral buildings back here, or this building, or this one, because he owns them himself. Green buildings always cost 1 money and 1 blue, or 1 cloth, and they're going to give you 1 extra income at the beginning of every turn. So if you're on this space, you would pay 1 money, 1 cloth, and you could just take this off the board, for instance, and build here. If you choose to overbuild one of the buildings of this type, it's going to go back in the supply, so somebody else could theoretically build it later. But if you choose to overbuild a neutral building, it's just out of the game. But like all other buildings, you're immediately going to score the points indicated on it. In this case, it's always going to be 2, and you're going to mark it with one of your houses as normal. If you choose to overbuild one of your buildings that hasn't resolved yet, for instance, this black player wants to overbuild his black building here, but we know that it hasn't happened yet because it's further along the road, he would have to wait until this guy finishes his turn, but he has to pay immediately. He can't use resources he gets from the future to buy this. So he would pay at that time. You just put it nearby so you don't forget. And once this resolves, you could replace it and gain the points as normal. The only other thing to note there is the pre-built buildings cannot be overbuilt, just the pink neutral buildings, and this building itself can never be overbuilt. Even if you're the one who owns it, remember, you can only overbuild buildings that you yourself own. So the final type of building is blue buildings or prestige buildings, and they can only be built over green buildings that you own. So if you don't own any green buildings, you can never build one, but you're just going to pay their cost. You're going to get rid of this, so you lose the income it generates every turn, and you would put this in its space, but they're usually worth a lot of points, hence the name prestige buildings. Also, some of them, along with with some gray, actually, when you build them, you get a favor. So you'd immediately move along the favor track, as we discussed earlier. So after all buildings up to the provost activate one at a time, remember it's always in this order, we're going to move on to the castle. Whoever put here first has the first opportunity to build in the castle, second is second, and so on and so forth. To build in the castle, you always have to pay 1 pink and then 2 other different resources. So for instance, 1 pink, 1 blue, and 1 brown is okay. 1 pink, 2 blue, it's not okay. It's got to be 3 different ones, and it always has to include 1 pink. Depending on the section of the castle that we're in, you're going to get a certain number of points. You can see you always get 5 in this section, 4 in this one, and 3 in this one. You can't build in whatever section you want. You're going to build in the section of the game that you're currently in. So it's always going to start with this section up here. It is possible, however, if you're in this section of the game, but this is totally full, so there's already 6 in here, however, you know, who built wherever, but it's your turn to build, then you would still continue building here. You'll get less points, but you're not restricted from building. The only time you are totally restricted from the building, if you're in the 3rd section of the game and this is full. Even if earlier sections are empty, if this section is full and we're in the 3rd section, you cannot build any more than here. But when it's your turn to build the castle, you can return as many resources to the supply as you want, and you're going to put 1 house in the corresponding section for each set of resources you return. So if you returned a pink, blue, gray, and a pink, brown, gray, and another pink, brown, gray, you could put 3 there in 1 turn, for instance. And then the next player would go, that placed here, and so on. They could build as many houses as they would like to that turn. There is also a penalty if you place in the castle and do not build. You lose 2 points, but you can never go below 0, and that is eliminated if the board is totally filled. So if you're in the 3rd section and you can't build because there's no more space left, you do not lose the 2 points, assuming you have a group of a pink and at least 2 other different resources. After all players have had their opportunity to build in the castle, whoever built the most spaces in the castle this turn is going to immediately get 1 favor, and it follows the same rules of the favors we already talked about. Remember, in the first part of the game, you can only go up to this 2nd column here, but you can continue taking from the same group. Your piece just will not advance any farther. But ties are always broken in favor of who built first. So let's say the blue guy was here and the black guy was here, and they each built 1 this turn. What they built in previous turns doesn't matter. The blue guy is going to get the free favor because he built first. With that, we move on to the end of turn phase, and during the end of turn phase, the bailiff is going to advance. If the provost is on the same space as him or before him in the road, he's going to advance 1 space and the provost will come back to him. If the provost is ahead of him, like so, he's going to advance 2 spaces, and then the provost, as always, will come back to the same space as him. If a section of the castle is filled that you're in, or he reaches one of the scoring spaces, here's the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd is down there kind of off the screen a little bit, you're going to have a scoring of that phase. And then after that scores, you're going to move on to the next section of the castle, even if this was the situation here, meaning this wasn't totally filled. It's also important to note if the bailiff reaches here and this is filled, meaning both conditions are met at the same time, you're still only going to have 1 scoring. But the way a scoring works is different depending on which section of the game it is. If it's the first section, if you've built at least 2 things, you're going to get 1 favor. And if you haven't built anything, you're going to lose 2 points. And you can see the 3rd is if you've built 2, you get 1 favor. If you've built 4 here, you get 2 favors. If you built 6 here, you get 3 favors. But if you don't build, you lose 4 points. And these are just indicated right here. But it's important to understand when you're getting multiple favors in the same phase, you have to take them in different rows. So for instance, if you got 3 favors at one time here, you can't take them all in the money row. You could do money, points, resources, or any combination of 3 different rows. But it is possible if you place the most that turn, you could take from 1 row, and then you could get the bonus in the scoring phase and take from the same row again 1 time, because the scoring phase and the building in the castle are technically different phases, even though they happen right after one another. So as mentioned, after a scoring occurs, you're going to move on to the next section of the game, which means you could advance farther along the favored tracks in any rows. Also, you're only going to be building in that particular part of the castle. After the 3rd scoring, there is a brief final scoring, and whoever has the most points at that time is going to be the winner. The additional scoring is for every gold you have is worth 3 points. Every other 3 resources, so maybe it's 2 pink and a cloth, is worth 1 point, and every 4 money you have is worth 1 point. Whoever has the most points wins the game. Let's get going with this example playthrough. The first thing players are going to do is they're going to collect income, so nobody has any residential buildings or anything like that. So they're all going to get 2 income at this time. So everybody's going to grab that. Then we're going to begin placing workers. We know the black player goes first because he's first on the turn order track this time. So he's going to place out here. Nobody's passed yet, so that cost him $1 to do so. And next, the orange player decides he's going to go right here. Again, that costs $1 at this time. And the blue player decides he'd like to get some resources, so he's going to go here for $1 as well. Next, the black player decides he's going to go to the inn. So again, that cost him $1. And the orange player is trying to keep his intentions a little bit hidden, so he's going to go to the gate for $1. The blue player decides he's going to put a guy here for $1.
and then back to the black player. The black player decides he's going to pass at this time. So by passing, he's going to cover this space up. He's made it more expensive for the other players. Also, because he's the first to pass, he's going to take $1. The orange player decides he doesn't want to pass yet, so it's going to cost him $2 because the 1 is now covered up to place on this space like so. So he's going to take those 2, he's going to place them out here. And the blue player is feeling pretty good about the way that went, so he's going to pay $2 as well to go here. Now it's back to the orange player because the black guy's out. The orange player is now going to pass at this time, and the blue player has the opportunity to go again, but it's going to cost him 3 to do so. He decides to pass, and he'll be the last to pass. So now these are going to resolve in order. So first the orange player is going to go, and now he can place this guy anywhere he'd like to for free. But remember, if it was somebody else's building he went to, though there are none yet, he would have to pay for it accordingly. He decides that he is going to take it down here to the turn order spot, so we know he's going to get to go first next time. So the black player is going to take this guy back. He's going to get 3 money, and the orange player can move the provost 0 to 3 spaces in either direction for free. He's just going to run him ahead to make sure his actions happen this turn. Nobody's here, so he's going to move up to first in play order, and the rest of the order is going to stay the same. The black player just placed here, so he's going to move over to this side. So next turn, even if somebody else has passed, it's only going to cost him 1 no matter what. Now we have the opportunity to move the provost, so the black player is going to go first. He could pay 0 to 3 money to move it in any direction. He doesn't see the point at this point, so he's going to pass. The orange player is going to pass, and then the blue player is going to pass. So then this resolves. The blue player decides that he's going to take a brown, and the blue player decides for here he's going to take a gray because that's his only choice, and for here he decides he's going to take a cloth. So he got a whole bunch of resources that turn, but the orange player is going to build a building, and specifically he's going to build a brown building. He can pick any of the ones from the supply. He decides to pick this one, which costs a brown and a pink, so he's going to take that, pay a brown and a pink to the bank, and then he's going to place that on the next available space. These are not available, they're filled. So he does that. He immediately gets 2 points because he built it, and he's going to cover it with one of his houses like so. So nobody built the castle, so that's not going to happen at this time. But the provost is ahead of the bailiff, so the bailiff's going to advance 2 spaces instead of 1, and then they're going to go together on the same space. Now the next turn is going to resolve exactly the same way, except it's going to be in this new turn order. We're going to jump ahead a little bit later in the game so you can see some more interesting situations. Welcome back. We progressed a bit in the game. We're now nearing our first scoring section. Everybody's just placed their guys, so we're going to resolve. First thing, blue is going to get $3, so he's going to take that. And then blue can move the provost for free, so he decides to move him forward because he doesn't want anybody to stop this from happening. Next, this guy can pay a money and a cloth, which he's going to do to gain a favor. Now, he can gain from any row. He decides he's going to gain from this row here, although he gets nothing for doing so at this time because his space is empty. So he's going to take his guy back. He chooses to stay in the inn because nobody has challenged him there. And now we're going to resolve if the provost moves. Orange is the first to go. Orange decides he doesn't want to spend any money because he doesn't have much to begin with. And then black's okay with it, as is blue. So all of these are going to resolve. So with that, this is completed. So now we're going to go on to building the castle. There are 2 people here, so the black player is going to build all that he would like to first. He can only build 1 because he has a whole bunch of brown, but those are not different resources. Remember, it has to be a food and then 2 different resources. So he's got a food, a stone, and a wood. So he's going to build 1 there, and he's immediately going to put one of his houses down, which is worth 5 points at this part of the game. So now he's finished building. The blue player can do the same. If he could build 2, he would, but he can also only build 1 because he is short on resources. So he's going to put them into the supply, and he's going to gain 5 points as well by marking it with his house there. From there, they're just going to take their guys back because we've completed building the castle, but we know the black player built the most because he built 1, and so did the blue guy, but the black guy built first, so he's going to get a free favor at this time. He chooses this row here, which allows him to build a brown building by paying 1 less wood. So he can pay 1 food only and build this one because this one costs a food and a wood, so he gets 1 wood off, so he's going to build that, and he's immediately going to gain his 2 points for building it by marking it with his symbol here. And then we know the bailiff is going to advance 2 spaces, which has caused the first scoring because he's reached the scoring marker that matches this symbol here. It would also start scoring if this was ever filled, but you can see there's still 2 empty spaces. So when this part scores, anybody who doesn't have any houses built, which is the orange player, loses 2 points, and anybody who has 2 or more houses gains a favor. They're going to do the favors in turn order, so blue's actually going to gain his favor first because both him and black have 2. So if he chooses to gain in this row, he can't advance because they're still in the first section of the game, even though this is a scoring. But he could do it, and he could build for 1 wood less. But however, he chooses to go in a different way, and he's going to gain 1 resource at this time. So he's going to pick that up. And then now the black player also gains 1 because he's built 2. He decides he is going to do it in the money column. So he's going to gain 4 money at this time. Now play advances to the second section, so they're no longer going to build in the first section under any circumstances, but it's going to continue playing just like this. We'll come back at the end of the game so you can see the final situation. Welcome back. We're approaching the end of the game. We just finished activating all the buildings, and note this player didn't get his gold because it was past the provost. So this time we move on to the castle. The black player is going to go first because he placed there first, and he's actually going to put 5 groups, which I've already laid out here. So he's going to discard those for 3 points apiece, and that's going to fill the entire castle. So that's going to be 15 total points for him and 5 new houses in the castle. Unfortunately for the orange player, even though he can build, he cannot do so at this time because this is the third section of the board and it's totally filled. Now because of that, he doesn't lose the 2 points for not building because he does have a legal group there that he could use. So with that, the black player is going to pick up 15 points and he gets a free favor because he built the most this turn, and of course orange built nothing. So for his free favor, he's just going to take 2 victory points, so he's immediately going to move up by 2. Now, even though the bailiff would only advance 1 space to here because the provost was behind him and the scoring space isn't until up there, the tower is totally filled, so we're going to have a final scoring at this time. First, we're going to score this section of the castle, and we can see that if you had at least 2 there, you're going to get 1 favor. If you had at least 4, you're going to get 2 favors. If you had at least 6, you're going to get 3 favors. And this happens in turn order, so we're going to start with black. We can see black actually had 6, so he's going to get 3 favors at this time, but they have to be taken on different rows of the favored track. For his first of the 3 favors, he's going to take 3 victory points. Even though he just advanced 2, that was technically a different phase, so he can pick that one for this time. Then he's going to take 7 money from the supply. He went all the way up the money track there. And then he's going to advance on this track, but he's not going to use this space. He's going to use this space to build a gray building for 1 stone less. So he's just going to pay a food to the bank, and then he's going to gain 6 points, because this one he wanted to build cost a food and a stone, and he can pay 1 stone less as his benefit. So he's going to put that there, cover it up, and gain 6 points in the track. And then next, the blue player is going to take his favors at this time. He only has 4, so he's going to get 2 favors. For his first favor, he's going to advance here and get a gold. And remember, gold is worth 3 points at the end of the game, but he's also going to advance on this track. Even though he's all the way to the end, he can still choose that track. And he's going to build over one of his residential buildings. It's going to be this one here with a prestige building. He chooses this prestige building here. It's worth 12 points, and it costs 3 cloth and a gold, so he's going to put those back in the bank. He's going to get rid of this, and he's immediately going to gain the 12 points. This, of course, goes back to the pool. So he moves up by 12. And then lastly, the orange player is going to do the same thing, and the orange player has 4, so they're going to get 2 favors as well. And then we're going to move on to the final scoring. So for every 4 money a player has, they're going to get 1 point. For every 3 resources they have, they're going to get 1 point. And for every gold, they're going to get 3 points. Nobody has any gold, but this guy has 6 resources here, so we know that's 2 points, for instance. And whoever has the most points at the end of the game is going to be the winner.
Caylus is essentially an abstract game because all information is public, and outside of randomizing the neutral tiles at the beginning of the game, there is no randomness in this game whatsoever. That can make it difficult for new players because the lack of randomness is going to inherently favor more skillful play. But with that in mind, this is still a fantastic design. It's a little bit older by today's standards. It's from 2005, but I still think it's one of the best games out there today. The game can play very differently depending what buildings players decide to build, and there's lots of different building strategies that players can employ to give different options to their opponents and to themselves. Also, the mechanics of the game integrate so well, and the player interaction of, you passing makes things cost more for other guys to place on them, I think is fantastic. Probably the best way to learn this one today is to check it out on Board Game Arena. They have an amazing implementation on there, so I would suggest that. But in any case, if you're into Euro games, because this is a little bit on the heavier end, as opposed to an entry-level game, definitely check this one out. That's Caylus.